Good evening, everyone. Is this on? Can you hear me? Okay. Good evening. Noting the hour in the presence of a quorum, I call the ABRSC to order. Members of the public who wish to watch the meeting online may use ActonTV's YouTube channel, found at the top of the agenda. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted on ActonTV's website at actontv.org. All right, I have an opening statement to read tonight. Welcome to everyone who was able to come out and attend tonight's meeting. On the agenda tonight is a first presentation of the budget proposal for FY26, as well as a second read and possible vote on the school calendar for next year. These are both topics that invoke a lot of emotions for community members and ones that also spark difficult discussions. Please keep in mind that we're all together in this as a community. Together, we make decisions on how best to structure ourselves and allocate funds. This is a collaborative process. We're going to divide public participation tonight. Those who wish to comment on the budget will be asked to wait until that portion of the evening. We'll have it right after the presentation so you can make informed commentary. And those who wish to have a comment on the calendar or any other topic may speak during the first public participation period of the evening. Could I get a show of hands for who wants to speak on the budget? And how many people have other topics they want to speak on? Okay. I want to make sure everybody who wishes to speak can, so we'll just see how many want to speak when we get there. Now, I'm not going to be toxically positive. That's not my way. This situation is bad because the funding model was designed to be a burden on the local tax base alone, with little to no funding from the state and federal governments. The solution, of course, is to redesign the funding model completely, something that we are advocating for via our state representatives. But for now, we are looking at yet another year of budget cuts. As we lay out the plan for balancing the district budget next year, please keep in mind that no one is excited about this. No one likes this. This is us doing our best in lean times. And as always, please make your voices heard, either by coming in to speak or sending an email in any way. We want to hear from you throughout this process. All right, so per school committee policy BEDH, members of the public are invited to speak for up to 3 minutes. Public participation is first going to take place for people that wish to speak on the school calendar or any topic other than the budget. Speakers must be recognized by the chair before speaking. The committee does not typically respond to comments during public participation. So those who want to speak on something other than the budget can come forward now. Hi, John.
John Peterson, 6 Jackson Drive. Earlier today, I sent the school committee a note about the national report card, which was issued, which of course had good news for Massachusetts, that we were in fact #1 in the nation. And since we are in a top school district, this is as good as public education gets, which is a wonderful thing. But I wanted to call everybody's attention to the fact that if you look at that report card and the change over time, the problems that we see in terms of change over time are in the group of learners that has the hardest time. The top, the 90th percentile, they're doing fine. They've lost no ground since the pandemic and in fact have gained ground. At the bottom, it's a completely different story. So as everybody knows, there are things that you can do with standardized tests and things you cannot do with standardized tests. But I encourage the school committee as part of its agenda to look at these results in conjunction with all of the other information that you have as you decide how to allocate resources across different learners.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on either the school calendar or another topic other than the budget? You can come forward. And please just say your name and where you live.
How's that? All right. Michael Blumberg, 17 Bromfield Road. I've prepared a statement for the school calendar. Good evening, Mr. Light, members of the school committee, and my fellow community members. I stand before you today in blue and the closest thing I have to gold as a parent in the AB school district. I also stand before you today as a member of the Jewish faith who latest estimates are only 14 million strong in a sea of 8 billion people. And while that may sound like a daunting minority to wrap your head around, I also stand before you as a member of the 50% of the world's population that does not use the Gregorian calendar to record our holidays. All these things and more, I stand before you today in solidarity with those who share the same simple but urgent request that our district continues to honor all the residents of our community by keeping our most sacrosanct holidays as days off on our school calendar. Why is this necessary? Because fairness, equity, and inclusion demand it. The fact is that the Gregorian calendar, which structures our academic year, was never meant to be religious, but history has molded it to force non-Christian students to choose between their education and their faith. In a country founded on religious freedom, that is not equity and that is not inclusion. It's an invisible but persistent penalty placed on thousands of people in our district who observe these holidays. We've seen the consequences: students missing critical lessons, tests, and extracurriculars, teachers and administrators unintentionally, and unfortunately sometimes intentionally, disregarding these observances. And beyond inconvenience, this sends a damaging message that some traditions matter more than others, that belonging is conditional. So until the day we have better policies in place that preserve cultural and religious freedoms, no longer penalize our students even implicitly, and hold accountable teachers and administrators who violate these policies, until we eradicate racism instead of races and promote respect and goodwill as human values not exclusive to any one religion or culture, until we reach a day when schools universally honor all cultures through policy, education, and action, and not just days off, I unequivocally support keeping these days on our calendar as a show of solidarity to our community, justice to our students, and an opportunity for education of those who might otherwise be ignorant to the cultures and religions of others. Some may say managing these holidays on the calendar is complicated, and I say the fairness is worth the effort. And with today's technology, making the calendar is the easy part. The hard part seems to be with those who don't accept that observances of minorities are just as intrinsically important as those of the majority. So to those of you who this doesn't affect every year or may not support these holidays, I urge you to ask yourself, what would you do if the calendar didn't account for Christmas off via vacation or Easter off because it's on a Sunday? What would you advocate? Would you advocate only for yourself or for all of those in your community? And what would your solution be that promotes fairness and equity for all? Until we have a better answer, keeping these holidays on the calendar is not just an accommodation, it's a statement. A statement that our public schools serve everyone, that no child should be penalized or feel like an outsider because their traditions don't align with an outdated default, that we see and honor the families that make our town the diverse, vibrant place it is. So let this be a stand for inclusion. Let it be a commitment to justice and a promise to every student, every family, and every future generation that you belong. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well said. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak?
Hi, Alex Reclean, 5 Wayside Lane. Also wanted to talk about the calendar, although I also had one sentence that I want to add at the end. I'm a former educator. I taught high school in a district that was far less diverse than Acton, and we did not have Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur off in that district, and we didn't have enough Indian or most other minorities to even consider the other holidays that are up for discussion, having those off. And just having that small population of Jews in class or missing class on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and having to deal with, as an educator, planning for those days, it was incredibly disruptive as an educator. So I saw the other side of this proposal, and I don't think that it necessarily works. You can't plan and treat these days, if you have them as an in-session day, you can't schedule tests, you can't schedule it as a due date for major assignments. It impacts your unit plan. You have to change the length of how long you are assigning things. It changes how long you've done things year to year. It actually I'm not sure it achieves some of the goals you're even hoping it might achieve if you were to go forward with that proposal. So having taught in a district like that, I wanted to provide that feedback. And that was with far fewer students impacted. Also as a Jewish parent, who put our money where our mouth was to pay a premium to come to this school district. I think I speak for many people when I say this would put us in an uncomfortable position of we've already chosen to value education, but we also have other things we value, and having to choose between these daytime celebrations or daytime school. That's a tough situation that I would prefer not to be put in. I was hoping to only talk about that, but following last night's executive orders, I wrote one more sentence that I, unfortunately, not to mix my messages, but following last night's hateful and bigoted executive order, will you please publicly reaffirm our community's commitment to celebrating, protecting, and respecting all students and their identities, and come up with a plan for how we will support our community and resist this gross order? Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any other public comment that isn't about the budget? Would you like to come speak?
Hi, good evening. I'm Bram David. I'm the rabbi of Congregation Beth Elohim here in Acton, and I want to thank Superintendent Light and the committee for including Yom Kippur and the first day of Rosh Hashanah as days off of school. I implore you to keep these as permanent days off, as well as Eid, Diwali, Lunar New Year, and Good Friday as days when school does not meet. And I can tell you Yom Kippur is as important to Jews as Christmas is to Christians. And my friends who are imams tell me that the same is true of Muslims in Eid. Now, we are talking about a maximum of 5 additional holidays each year, holiday days each year. But sometimes these holidays occur on weekends and school breaks. Perhaps 2 or 3 school days are impacted on an average year. Inevitably, when the number of these days is 3 or more, the whole topic comes up for debate. Our children deserve their most sacred days off every year, and not only when it's convenient for the majority. Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah are days of reflection, family, and community, with a focus on daytime prayer and activities, many at the synagogue. In a time of heightened anti-Semitism and othering of Jewish students, having these days off tells them that they matter, that their culture, their heritage, and religion are respected by the district. Let's not put this up for a vote every year or every 5 years, but make a permanent policy for the district. I previously served in Medford, where the district adopted a detailed policy on holiday observance that includes Rosh Hashanah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and other non-Christian holidays. I'm happy to connect you to Paul Rousseau of the Medford School Committee, who spearheaded their very thoughtful process, which has had a positive impact on their community. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any other people that wish to speak on a topic other than the budget? All right, hearing no other public participants, I'm going to turn it over to Peter for the superintendent's update.
All right, thank you, Becca. First, I want to do just a quick shout out to our boys indoor track team and our AB Bromfield gymnastics team. They won the dual county championship, so congratulations to those 2 teams. I also want to congratulate our facilities team in particular, but our community in general, because we just recently received the 2024 Mass Save Climate Leader Award at the State House. I was joined by Adam Klein, the school committee chair, Sherry Lynn Matthews, our director of finance and operations, Mark Hamill, our facilities coordinator, and Kate Crosby, our energy manager. I think the construction of the Boardwalk campus had to do with it, but we have a long history of really effective management of energy and a commitment to the environment. So it was nice to receive that recognition. Just as a reminder, our budget workshop is on Saturday, February 8th. I'm not going to say more about that, but that's coming up. We recently held our 25th annual Martin Luther King Jr. Community Service Awards night. We celebrated 570 students who earned community service awards for recognition this year. So that is an absolutely fantastic night and thing to be able to do for our community. Congratulations to all those students. We also have some information going out to commemorate both Black History Month and President's Day in this superintendent's update. We also are excited to announce that we have some Fulbright exchange educator visits coming up in January and February. So our World Language Department was chosen to host 3 Fulbright exchange educators in the next 4 Mondays. They are from Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Georgia. So congratulations to Emily Stroessel, Kendra Kersey, and Seneca Savakowski, who will all be hosts for that visit. So thank you to our educators for taking the time to do that. And another just big shout out to the AB United Way and the Resource Center. They recently held a shoe giveaway, which is an annual event for them. And they partnered with Operation Warm and McGovern Subaru of Acton to share the love with a donation of new athletic shoes and socks for children. Over 100 children were gifted a new pair of shoes and socks. The leftover shoes are now stocked at the AB Resource Center, where any residents of Acton or Boxborough are welcome to come and choose quality in-season clothes for free. And then finally, Adam Klein and I are hosting our next community coffee with the superintendent and chairperson on Zoom on February 25th, 2025, and that is an 8:30 a.m. coffee. We do alternate the mornings and nights to try and give everyone a chance to get in.
All right, thank you for that. All right, so ongoing business, we're at the monthly personnel report part, which is Andrew Shen's chance to give us an update.
Yeah, I mean, as you'll see in your document, there really aren't much changes right now, which is fairly typical for this time of year. Our personnel staffing has remained relatively fluid. There continues to always be a little bit of movement within our support staff where you have classroom assistants, special education assistants, where some openings were finally filled, and then there's some who had left. But other than that, it's relatively stable.
Thank you. And ongoing business, we're going to do the Q2 budget update, but Sherry has the flu, so it sounds like a Peter job.
Sherry has the flu, so I'm going to do a very abbreviated version of it. You know, I will summarize Sherry's memo, which is obviously in the packet. She also provided all the details. In terms of revenue, right now we're trending about $525,000 to the good. A large chunk of that is investment revenue, which is coming in beyond projections. Investments have remained high at this point, so that's trending well. We had a very small amount of additional Chapter 70 aid beyond what we budgeted that had also come in. So we'll continue to watch that. That means when we talk about revenue, we can't exceed the budget that we set earlier in the year. So when I say there's $525,000 to the revenue, that means that is the floor of what our turn back to excess and deficiency will be at the end of the year. We will add to that as we go through because it's not possible to spend every dollar in a $100 million entity over the course of a year. So, you know, it's too early to project what turnbacks will be. You know, I continue to say, you know, a fair guess is probably somewhere between $700,000 and $1 million. Sherry would not venture a guess because she's a finance person. I am more of a risk taker. So that's where we are right now. And if you want Sherry to come in and do a full Q2 update and go line by line through the budget, let me know. Otherwise, we will consider that to be your Q2 update.
All right, and then we'll just stay with Peter for the
Sherry's watching at home.
superintendent's-
She knows.
The preliminary budget for FY26. We've got a presentation. All right, so while Peter gets this going, I'll just remind everybody, we're going to have the presentation, then we'll take public comments, and I think we'll have everybody line up so we can get a sort of sense of how many people wish to speak, and then after that, the committee will deliberate.
All right, so hello, everyone. I moved over here just so that I could have my back to our educators, who I know are probably very frustrated with this budget. That way I don't have to see it coming. But, in all seriousness, I think, we just did our educator presentation on Tuesday. I will say the same thing to you that I said to our educators, is there's pretty much nothing in this presentation that's going to leave you feeling fully satisfied. This has been a frustrating budget to develop for everyone. I do want to thank members of our leadership team, who I know this has weighed really heavy on over the last few months. I know it's also weighing heavy on our educators as they see this rolled out. And knowing that we're really in our 4th year of this kind of budgetary pattern, and I think that just needs to be acknowledged that it's taking its toll on everyone in the district. As we develop this budget, we absolutely remain committed to our core values of wellness, equity, and engagement. I will think you, throughout the presentation, will start to see that those are starting to crack in some different places in terms of having the resources we need to fully support what we believe is the high-quality education that achieves all of those core values. So tonight, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about the budget timeline and the process that we're in at this point. Starting tonight, we will talk about school committee budget guidelines, just to make sure we're all refreshed on what those are. We will share a little bit about revenue projections, including state aid, grants, town assessments. Same thing on expense side, talk about what would it cost to maintain all of the services we're trying to do, but also how did we develop the expense side of our budget. We will talk about the strategies we used in terms of developing the actual budget, and then we will also start to look forward a little bit in time to what this might play out in over the next couple of years, and then an opportunity for questions and discussion. In terms of timeline and process, we're at the start of the public side of the budget process. And I really would say this year it's actually part B of the public side of this process, because we had convened the elementary budget task force as a subcommittee of the school committee earlier this year, which did a lot of work around engagement with community, both through surveys, focus groups, public meetings, coming back to school committee, having an opportunity for more public comment on that, and then ultimately the school committee adopting some recommendations from that, and kind of hearing where we were headed. At that point, our leadership team had to do a lot of work to figure out what to do with elementary budget task force recommendations, to see what was feasible, but also what might need to be delayed because it may not be operationally what we are able to do in the first year, and think about how to play that out, plus consideration of all of the secondary budgeting process as well. So our leadership team has been working for some time now behind the scenes in terms of developing what you see tonight. There are essentially 2 major iterations of the school district budget that come before the school committee. There's what's called the superintendent's preliminary budget, which represents the best thinking of our leadership team early in the budget process. We then go through a period of updates, and we come back to you with something called a recommended budget. At that point, we conduct the public budget hearing, and then finally the school committee will vote to adopt the school committee's budget at the end of that process. Tonight's the first night of that. The big night, or day, I should say, is going to come Saturday, February 8th, so a week from this Saturday. We are right back in this room. That is the budget workshop, and that is focused on the preliminary budget presentation. So you will not see changes to the budget from what you're seeing tonight. The focus of the workshop is simply going deeper into that. We will then take all of the feedback in that we get, think about what we need to do with that, and over the course of February, develop that into the recommended budget, which comes back to you in March. Key dates for you, budget workshop, and then preliminary budget vote. The preliminary budget vote, you have to take the vote because it's in the regional agreement. That is not necessarily a legally binding vote, but the school committee has historically and traditionally understood that to be setting kind of the maximum threshold of the budget, where once you set the top budget number that the towns need to be able to plan for, you don't go over that. So that's an important vote that comes at the end of Budget Saturday. We then have our budget hearing on March 13th and the final budget vote on March 20th, headed to the 2 town meetings on May 5th and May 12th. One of the things that I think we heard a lot in the community last year was a lot about enrollment and staffing trends, and wondering if they were running in parallel to each other. So I wanted to share a little bit of data about our students and our educators as we start this meeting. So Andrew already presented this information to you earlier in the school year, but these are based on the NASDAQ enrollment reports. And since regionalization, we've gone down about 605 students, 600 students, which is about 10% of the total district student population. And over the next 8 years, we're scheduled to go down about another 300 students. Reducing 300 students sounds like a lot, but that's over 8 years. And if you divide 300 by 8, that's a pretty steady, gradual, slow decline in student population. That will impact different levels at different times. And so, for example, the junior high school is probably scheduled to lose about 50 or so students in the next 3 years. The high school has declined, but it's going to be relatively stable over those 3 years, and then they will decline as the students pass through the junior high school. But overall, here's what we're looking at for enrollment over the next few years, with the top number being elementary enrollment over 8 years, the middle number being high school enrollment, and the bottom number being the junior high enrollment. Just keep in mind there are relative sizes to all of these populations that make those numbers, statistically significant in different ways. Wanted to talk about educator trends as well, because we heard a lot about this from some community members last year, and I do want to acknowledge that we have more educators in our district today than we had when we regionalized. And that's despite our student population having dropped. And so I wanted to go a little bit deeper into what we're actually seeing and why, even though we might have more total educators, I think everyone's feeling a lot more taxed and tired. This is actually looking at educators who are student-facing. All day long, every day. So people who teach in classrooms, it could be classroom teachers at the elementary school. It includes our specials at the elementary school. It also includes special educators that are working in some of those areas, because there is some overlap between what's considered a classroom teacher, like, for example, if someone's in a co-taught environment, as opposed to a special educator where it's more pull-out instruction. So numbers can get a little skewed, but here's the overall trend, is that through 22, 23, where DESE has actually verified the data, we had gone down in terms of classroom educators by about 11. And then over the last couple of years, DESE has not yet reported that data, so I showed it in the orange and red just to differentiate between what you could find on DESE's website and what we've now tracked internally. But we've declined, significantly in terms of our classroom teacher workforce as well. And so overall, from the time of regionalization to now, and in this proposed budget, we actually have gone down in terms of classroom-facing educators proportionate to the district's overall enrollment. Where I think we've seen also changes in patterns in the school district over time is in our high-needs student populations. And if you recall, the high-needs population for a school district is actually a combination of students whose first language isn't English, low-income, English language learners, and students with disabilities. And we're seeing a significant increase in the trends there. Students with disabilities, the total percentage of students with disabilities hasn't necessarily increased over time. It's been pretty stable. However, the intensity of the students with disabilities that we're serving now in our schools has increased dramatically. And we've talked a lot about the different programs that we've developed, and we've actually gone into detail about the high return on investment we get, even from a financial standpoint of bringing programs in district and how that helps us avoid much more significant costs. When you start looking at support staff, you now have a better understanding of, as the complex needs of our students have changed, so too have the increase in support staff across the district. And so overall district enrollment has come down. Educator, classroom-facing positions have done something similar. And I think I outdid myself with the animation on this, too many clicks. Number of classrooms teachers has declined in proportion to enrollment. Number of support staff has increased in proportion to the increased needs of our student population. And we've also really done a really clear job of showing why, especially in special education, that's a good return on investment for the school district and for taxpayers. Budget guidelines, the overarching goal, and I think this goes to one of the public comments we heard earlier, was really thinking about how we're funding our schools and the support services for students. The priority that the school committee set in all of this budget process was making sure we had a robust tiered system of supports, and that includes student social, emotional, mental, and behavioral health needs, academic needs, multilingual services, and special education services and supports. We started to see that crack last year when we initially had proposed having to reduce some of those services, particularly in tiers 2 and 3. We ended up restoring those when we had some additional Chapter 70 revenues late in the budget process. I will say that's cracking even more this year as the budget deficit has grown, and we have not proposed that we were able to fully fund all of those supports. Revenue projections and cost control were another area of budget guidelines that you gave us, and you voted a budget guideline that said no greater of a budget increase than 3%. And that also included not having a Boxborough assessment of more than 6%, and not using any excess and deficiency. So those were the financial guidelines that we had to work with. We also had a guideline to increase capital funding. The costs of buildings and maintenance has gone up substantially, and we have some really significant capital needs ahead of us, particularly as we start to get into multi-million dollar rooftop projects over the next few years. We have to have that funding available. We also have to plan for obligations such as the cost of our contracts and wages, retirement contributions for non-teaching staff. Remember, teaching staff are covered by the state. Non-teaching staff is a local responsibility. Health insurance premiums, I'll talk more about that in a little bit, and run-out claims from the Acton Health Insurance Trust, which is something we have to budget for, but is starting to go away, so that's some good news. We're not done. You also asked us to really look hard at class sizes across the district and make sure we were budgeted within school committee guidelines for all of our levels, incorporate prioritized recommendations from the elementary budget task force, and we've already spent time on that topic in here, and then utilize staff attrition, so retirements and resignations whenever possible, to save money in our budget and reduce staffing levels. We are not fully able to reduce the amount of money we need to just on attrition alone, so but it has been incorporated. And then a goal of reducing kindergarten tuition for families. That is another one that, given the number of reductions that we have in the district, we did not build that into the preliminary proposal. That is certainly something we can talk about, but I want to be transparent that there is no slide in here that's going to talk to kindergarten tuition. So in terms of revenue, there's a lot on this slide. I'll cut to the punchline, so I put it in red. They're both negative increases in terms of revenue. We're going to go down total about $23,000. That's pretty much flat in terms of what we were projecting for revenue at the beginning of this budget process. We've heard some updates from the state, and I'll talk to those later. But incorporated in the preliminary budget was pretty much flat state revenue. And I think one of the greatest challenges about having flat state revenue is it increases the burden on the town. Because as you can see, there's no use of reserves in this budget. Charter reimbursement only comes in at about 0.1%. Other revenues like Medicare, which was on the previous slide, that's 0.5%, and regional transportation is a whopping 2%. The state revenues really are 14% of the budget, but the towns have to pick up the rest. Going back, a dozen or so years, the state was picking up a larger chunk of that tab, and as state funding has been capped at the $30 per pupil, their percentage of the total pie gets less and less, and that's why I think it's been such a hard challenge for the communities to continue to fund. That is the piece of the state funding formula that just does not work, given minimum aid status, and hopefully they can revise that. So our total revenue projections are $116 million and just north of that number. In terms of expenses, I just want to talk through this a little bit. Some of you on the right will say, wait a minute, the base budget for next year is $116,135,080, and I know what every single one of you is thinking. Wait, this year's budget was $116,380,105. How is next year's budget increasing 3%, and yet it's actually a smaller amount? Well, there's two significant factors at play. One, you didn't vote a $116 million budget initially last year. You voted a $114 million budget. And we added to that by tapping into excess and deficiency, largely for the Acton Health Insurance Trust run-out claims. So that was about $1.7 million. When we did that, we agreed with both towns that we would not use the increased base that created to start our budget process for this year. The other significant change is that we're paying off the junior and senior high school debt from the renovations that happened 20-plus years ago. Those are going away in this fiscal year, so they no longer appear in the budget next year. Initially, there's like a fleeting moment where we say, oh, look, there's an additional $1.6 million in revenue that we can use, and that's actually not the case because it was excluded debt. which means voters voted for a debt exclusion, which is temporary, and so the revenue from that debt exclusion only exists while the debt is being paid off, and as soon as we pay the debt off, the town's tax revenue actually decreases by $1.6 million as well. And so the actual base that we had to build our budget off of was 112.7. We increased that by your guideline at 3%. A true maintenance of service budget, which is if we tried to just do everything that we were doing next year that we do this year, that would be 118.1, which left us about the $1.9 million gap. So that was the fundamental challenge that we've been working through over the course of this budget. These are the increases and decreases. I'm showing this to you now. A couple of things, like the really big numbers are where the budget sways. If you look at finance in particular, that is the 1.6 million that I talked about with debt being reduced. That's largely where that falls. And then similarly, in the personnel budget, it's going up 1.4 million, but that's because we're reducing 1.9 million. So we've reduced 1.9 million to get to a 1.4 million increase. So otherwise, it would have been going up well over $3 million on the personnel budget. Special education costs continue to rise. Transportation is not subsiding the way we want. Out-of-district tuitions can come and go. So we're continuing to watch those. Utilities are another major driver in this budget, and the cost of capital. So just want to kind of point out where the major drivers are. The drivers are not sitting in the supply line budgets of the various departments. Those are either flat or increasing marginally, or in some cases, people said, actually, I don't need that money, why don't you take it out? And we're really frugal with what they were requesting. Total expenses, we are heavily a personnel-based entity, and so just our salaries and substitute costs alone are about 63% of the total budget. The finance budget consists of three things: health insurance, which is a personnel cost; retirement, which is a personnel cost; and debt service, which is not a personnel cost. Most of the finance budget is personnel as well, and so it's about 85% of our total budget sits with people and the personnel in the school district, and that leaves very little room for anything else to take place. So you can see, secondary categories here are special education. That's probably about a $25 to $30 million venture for us between out-of-district and in-district costs. Technology costs us some money, but that's not a significant part of the budget, and then facilities. So I know, particularly last year during the budget process, there was a lot of interest in really just digging into a lot of these lines. The challenge is we're actually pretty thin in a lot of those lines, and it's not where our cost sits. And so there's a limited return for anything that we cut in those areas. So our total preliminary budget, again, was $116,135,080. That's a 3% budget increase. Because this is all tied up in the excluded debt, it's actually only a 1.69% increase in the assessments to the towns. But remember, they lose revenue as well to pay for this. So it doesn't actually change people's taxes, except that the excluded debt comes off. In Acton, that turns to about a 0.97% increase, so under a percent increase to the Acton side of that budget. And then in Boxborough, that's a 5.25% increase. And just as a reminder to those of you from Boxborough, this is because we are enrollment based on a 3-year rolling average. So the proportion of students coming from Boxborough is still on the increase, and the proportion of students coming from Acton is decreasing, which is why the Boxborough assessment continues to be, about 4 percentage points or a little bit more higher than Acton, and that's been a consistent trend over the last few years. In terms of how we went about balancing this, we're running out of options, and there's limited chances we have to try and save large chunks of money. And so the two things that are available to us, and we've chosen to focus on the first this year, is prioritizing the critical services within the district and trying to just become as efficient as possible within the existing structures that we have. I want to make a really clear statement that being efficient with use of resources and being effective with the use of those resources are not necessarily synonymous. In the best years we have, we should be doing a balancing act between the right amount of efficiency and the right amount of effectiveness. As resources become tighter and tighter, the balancing act gets pushed over to efficiency, which means that, and I think you would hear this from educators, the quality of what they feel like they can do becomes diminished over time because we're just not being as effective as we once were, but we are becoming more and more efficient. And I just want to call out that that's a tension that we have. The other option available that we didn't pursue was really just kind of having to start over and reimagining the whole structures of what we do in the school district. And I'll talk about that in a little bit toward the end of this. Some significant finance changes. I don't need to mention retired debt. I already went into that. Staff attrition, we saved about $450,000 from retirements and resignations that came off the top of our budget before we had to reduce staff. Health insurance, this is an interesting one. Health insurance, the line in the budget is going up 1%, but our health insurance rate was increased by almost 15%. As of this version of the budget, it went up 12%. However, we have two real success stories, and if you remember last year, this was one of the major restructuring initiatives we did, where we looked at a structural change in the district. We moved over to Maya, and we implemented a health insurance opt-out program for our employees. That is saving us this coming year $613,000 that we were actually able to take off the budget, which allowed us to preserve that many more services. So that's a real success story. And then in terms of run-out claims for the Acton Health Insurance Trust, we had budgeted about $600,000. The trust is managing those very carefully. Run-out claims have been within reason, and so we're able to reduce the $600,000 portion of the budget to about $150,000 next year. So that is going to save us another $450,000. So between the decrease in the run-out claims budget and the implementation of the opt-out program, that is largely offsetting the 12% increase in health insurance. So that's the good news, and I'll give you the bad news in a little bit, because we're not done talking about health insurance. Vacancy factor, we've talked to you about this before. That was a portion of the budget that was a negative expense increase that was built into the budget that accounted for savings we would see within a school year for leaves of absence that were unpaid, things like that. That has just not come to fruition over the last several years the way it has. So we've been working gradually to reduce that liability in the budget so it doesn't sit there every year. So we're putting a modest amount of money toward that as well, but that does increase that portion of the budget by about $75,000. Then things that we've done, just really looking at enrollment, managing class sizes carefully. We've gone through every single section in class in the school district to look at class sizes, to try and figure out what we needed to do to get to those school committee guidelines. That results in a reduction of about 8 general educators between the junior high and high school to fall within school committee guidelines. Implementing some recommendations from the Elementary Budget Task Force. The largest one here is going forward with a reduction of classroom assistant hours by about 25%. I'll tell you what that leaves. It leaves full-time kindergarten assistants. It leaves all of the lunch and recess coverage that we have to have in order to work through the educator contract. And then it leaves about the equivalent of a grade level worth of assistants at each school as part-time assistants that principals will work with staff to figure out how best to allocate over the course of the spring and into the next fall. This is also partially an Elementary Budget Task Force recommendation, but it's coming out of budgetary necessity, quite honestly, because I think if we could add support staff, we'd be adding multilingual staff. You heard that in the program eval presented at the last meeting. We actually need more multilingual educators in the district. We did not have flexibility this year in terms of adding staff. So I think something we're going to have to do over the course of the spring is really work hard across elementary schools and with principals to look at our scheduling practices within each school to make sure that we're providing priority for multilingual services and special education services so that the people who deliver those services can meet the needs of students. That is going to happen similarly for some of our grouping in Tier 2 and 3. Intervention sizes, and this is also something we discussed in the Elementary Budget Task Force. Quite honestly, the Elementary Budget Task Force and the administration, if we could, we'd be adding Tier 2 and 3 intervention services to the district, but we're not in that position right now. And so this budget proposes to reduce those to some degree. So we're going to really have to look at group sizes, think about scheduling of services, and try and become, as I said, as efficient as possible. And I don't use the word efficient in the sense that it's the gold standard of great. So proposed staffing changes. And we're not going into each staff position tonight, but I do want to share what they are with you, knowing that when we come back on Budget Saturday, we're actually going to have our principals here to be able to also talk about why different positions were prioritized over others. I will say, I think every principal would share that this was just being presented with a series of bad choices, not something that anyone felt like they were getting a win out of the budget process from. We are going to propose some restructuring of district-wide special education leadership in this budget. And actually, let me back up. Additions, we do have to add some special education services to the budget. We need another classroom assistant, and we need at least some BCBA hours. I actually expect that this could change more as we go from the preliminary budget to the recommended budget, because we are tracking a number of services that might need to increase for some individual students. Others, I've largely already talked about them, but there are 2 additional stipends in here that we were proposing to reduce. One was stipends for culturally responsive teacher leaders and seed leader stipends. If you remember, we were able to bring these in with federal money, ARPA grants that came into existence around the pandemic. Those long expired. We were trying to hold on to these things as long as possible. But we wanted to try and preserve another staff member out of this. Similarly, World of Difference program is an interesting one. I think we would love to keep it. However, the Anti-Defamation League actually ended the program. They've kind of gone in a different direction from that. We started to do, we're not running it right now at the junior high because of that, but we were trying to do some homegrown work at the high school to continue it. But that is something else that is on the table for this. In terms of reductions, I already mentioned we're looking at proposing kind of a restructuring of some district-wide special education leadership. We are also proposing a reduction of a 0.6 of a position at the district offices as well in terms of office admin assistant. In elementary school, it's 8.69, and these are full-time equivalents of positions, which includes a math specialist, the equivalent of 5.55 general education assistants, 1.9 reading assistants. That's the equivalent of about 4 out of the 6 reading assistants that we have in the district. And then we have a library media teacher who's leaving at the end of the year. What we would propose doing is filling that with an assistant as opposed to a full-time library media teacher to be able to realize some savings there. None of those are within the vision that we have for our schools. I will say that. In terms of junior high school and high school, most of these are largely enrollment-based and really looking hard at class sizes, but it's 3 general education teachers. If you remember, during the budget process last year, we reduced 1 junior high English position because it was vacant, or it would be vacant. We didn't hire it. This reduces the rest of what would be a full team, and so the result is that we will have 1 junior high team that has, like, I don't know whether it's 2 or 3 sections of 7th grade and 2 or 3 sections of 8th grade. The kids don't mix, but the team has 2 different grade levels that they serve. Class sizes at the junior high will be at 24, which is the upper end of school committee guidelines. And at the high school, we're proposing the reduction of 5 general education teachers. 1 English teacher was actually reduced prior to the start of this school year because it became vacant, and we were forecasting that we would have a tough budget. So we just chose to leave the position vacant through attrition. That's accounted for in this budget, as well as another English teacher, 2 social studies teachers, and a math teacher. This leaves high school class sizes averaging between 22 and 23 on average. So that is where we ended with this. We are also proposing to reduce 1.875 campus security staff. These are our campus monitors at the high school, and a 0.475 STAR tutor. The STAR tutor is, the STAR program is the one for students who are returning from hospitalizations. On the good side of some news, we're actually having fewer students returning from hospitalizations. But the high school looked at this. I mean, if we had it, it would be great, but they do feel like they can reduce this position. So we're also looking forward as we move from, the preliminary budget to what you'll see in March when we come back. The governor released her budget. That included an increase in Chapter 70 aid from $30 a student to $75 a student. It also included an increase in regional transportation aid that got funded at 95%, which would be very significant for us. We will build those into the next iteration of the budget, but we're cautious right now because regional transportation aid, the governor proposed higher levels of aid and the legislature cut them after the governor's proposal last year. And so this is something that we want to continue to advocate with our legislatures. Don't touch regional aid. Leave the governor's proposal in place and find other things that you can add to it. Maya has also now confirmed our health insurance rate increase. Their average statewide increase, and they are the state's largest insurance pool, is going to be 14.84% next year, and that is going to be our rate. They also gave us an early heads up that they think next year's rate might actually be higher. And so that is something that we are stuck in a multi-year health insurance trend. It's making me feel as though the Acton Health Insurance Trust was a leading indicator of what is actually a industry in crisis right now. As we talk to experts in the industry, we think that's actually largely driven by some of the new drugs that have come on the market that are extremely expensive in the United States, but also coming out of the pandemic, a lot of the major hospital groups renegotiated contracts with employees and costs went up substantially. And so there's a real market correction in health insurance that's taking place and impacting everyone who provides health insurance. Statewide unemployment liability is also something we're tracking. I don't know if you've followed this, but Massachusetts is being required to repay the federal government approximately $2.1 billion in pandemic relief money because they allocated it out of a wrong account to unemployment insurance. Early indicators are that liability is going to be passed down to employers. We don't know what that looks like for us, but it's certainly something we're keeping our ears open for. So kind of where we sit our scorecard for the next iteration of the budget is we're up about $500,000 in state revenues. That's a good thing. The challenge is I'm fearful that's probably going to be largely eaten up unless we see some other new revenues coming in. Health insurance alone, the change from the 12% we were budgeting to the almost 15%, that's a $300,000 cost increase for us. So that eats up a chunk of the $500,000, and then we don't know what unemployment insurance is going to look like yet, and we don't know, as I said, we're tracking a number of students across the district and their needs over the course of the spring to just make sure we're budgeting appropriately for it, because what we want to avoid is a situation we had several years ago where needs increased over the summer and we didn't have the budget for it, and so it impacted us mid-year. So that's some early thinking. Just to recap some structural changes, I talked a lot about the success of the health insurance changeover, although hearing a rate like that doesn't feel like it, but it's happening everywhere. We also, in this year's budget, restricted the use of E&D to one-time expenses, and we pretty much only used that because of the Acton Health Insurance Trust payout that we had to have. Next year, we have no E&D in the budget, so we're actually into a period of time where we're anticipating building reserves back, which is absolutely necessary. And then budgeting, the reducing elementary classroom assistants in the next budget, that was a recommendation of the budget task force we had convened. I recognize that's not a popular one, probably across the district, but it is something where we just don't have a lot of good options on the table. And then really having to think about reconsidering elementary schedules in order to become more efficient with how we're scheduling staff and trying to provide as many services to the students we have in our schools as we can with the resources that we actually have available. That's the greatest challenge right now in the situation we're in. As we look forward, I've already talked about, health insurance as an industry trend. I don't know what unemployment's going to look like over multiple years. Wages in the education industry continue to run high, and I think that's just an industry correction from a period of stagnation for a lot of contracts. So, I don't necessarily see the major set cost centers of our budget giving way anytime soon. I think we're going to have a couple of choices ahead of us. One is to just continue this hyper-focus on efficiency, and I think that feels to people like it's just whittling away at things, and I'm not discounting that feeling. I think, you know, the alternative, and I'm starting to hear this more and more from different groups of people. I've started to hear it from some educators, some administrators, some community members. Is it time to just rethink the organization of our students across the district in a much bigger and broader way, where maybe we can focus our resources? I will be really blunt and direct that I am not saying that's the same thing as closing a school, because I think the idea that closing a school is actually limiting in terms of all the options and opportunities that are out there, and it's also incredibly divisive in the community that we have, and I think would quickly devolve into an unproductive discussion. When I say reorganization, I actually think that means putting a group together to really rethink what are all the ways different communities structure their students across the district. And you know, just because something worked for us 50 years ago and 30 years ago doesn't mean it has to be what's in place for the next 30 or 50 years. And so really just taking an opportunity to rethink about what the organizational structure of the district looks like. So, you know, that's the only other place I can really think to go, unless we have a miraculous source of revenue that comes in from the state or the federal government. I'm ruling out the latter of those. I just don't see the federal government giving us a lot of guidance or a lot more revenue. I think it would be nice if the state did, and I think we should be advocating for that. We need some immediate direction from you. I talked about that we're already tracking additional revenues, and we're also tracking additional expenses. The guidelines that we have in place say the budget can increase 3%. That means if we leave the budget at 3%, if we get additional expenses, we have more cuts. If we have additional revenue, it goes to the towns to reduce their assessment. I am not recommending that option. What I am recommending is that we leave the two town assessments where they're at, because I think they're very, very reasonable on the two towns, given the circumstances that we're in. I think that the school committee has fully recognized the need for a lot of fiscal restraint this year in order to preserve as much tax levy capacity for both the Acton and Boxborough moving into subsequent years, knowing this is now a longer-term pattern. I think the school committee personally has done its job in that regard. So I'm not recommending that we reduce the assessments more. What I would recommend is that we leave the assessments in place and instead allow us to increase the budget proportional to cover the additional revenues and costs. So the towns wouldn't see any new numbers from us. What would change is the budget might go up by another 0.25% or something like that, just as we get more revenues. But we're not charging taxpayers more. That's the bottom line. So I would recommend the first option here. I don't think you need to vote that. I think I just need to have an understanding from you that's the direction you want to go. And that's what I'm hoping to leave either tonight with or even on Budget Saturday. That would be fine too, so that we can do our work over the course of the next month. So with that, Becca, I will turn it back to you and happy to answer some questions.
All righty. Thank you, Peter.
I'm going to come over there just for public speaks.
Yeah. All right, so let's have the public participation period first. If you'd like to speak, please line up sort of from the, microphone over, and we'll just go one at a time. You have about 3 minutes to speak. If there's not a ton of people, which it doesn't seem like, so I think we can go with the 3 minutes. We are going to keep time, so, just let us know who you are and where you live, and then give us your statement. Sorry for everybody listening online. It isn't always clear when we're in the room if we can hear or not through the microphone. Yeah, in the meantime, you can come sit here.
Try this.
All right. Big
Thank
time.
you.
All right. All right, you guys. All right. So you probably heard the first part. Did you hear the first part?
We did, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We as assistant teachers realize that it is very important for us to manage the lunches and recesses at our school. However, it is just as important for us to have a connection, thank you, and relationship with our students in a learning environment in the classroom. If we do not have this connection,
1 minute left.
we and our students will not know each other. Our presence in the classroom makes it possible for the head teacher to focus on the students and the curriculum. We help our students during their MTSS time with having small group instruction. We cover for teachers when they have IEP meetings, and we help multilingual students, especially when they are new to our school. We then build these relationships with our students when we are in the classroom, and these connections carry over into the lunchroom and out at recess. We are responsible for 120 students at each lunchtime and recess. Therefore, it is
15
critical
seconds.
for us assistant teachers to build connections with our students. This helps us to make our communication more effective during lunch and recess. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kieran Joshi. I teach 7th grade at R.J. Gray. I'm not a member of the community, of the Acton community. I teach math as my primary job, and I feel that as over time, that's now becoming my secondary responsibility. I'm creating an environment where students feel comfortable learning and taking academic risks. I do so by creating relationships with my students. 20% increase in class size may not sound like a big increase, but when you think about the fact that it might be 4 to 5 children in each one of my classes, trying to create meaningful relationships with 20 students during a 45-minute class is already a struggle, and now I need to add 4 or 5 students to that mix. I've noticed over the last years that even with smaller class sizes, that the need for those emotional relationships and connections with my students has become more important. The academic needs have also increased. Since COVID, there have been more gaps in fundamental concepts for the students, and the number of students with anxiety has skyrocketed. Trying to create meaningful relationships has become even more important to my students. So I went into teaching because of the students. I love spending time with them and teaching some math along the way as well. I will continue to work with the students and do the best that I can for them. But with 20% larger classes, that means that the quality and depth of my relationships will suffer. And we appreciate that these are not choices that the school committee needs to make, but definitely want you to understand the implications. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Carrie Cusick. I'm a reading specialist at Blanchard. I apologize for my voice. I'm really okay, but it's just sound like a frog, as students would say. I have been a reading specialist in Acton-Boxborough for 14 years, both at Merriam and Blanchard. I've been blessed to share my passion with teaching children to read and sharing this knowledge and learning with colleagues and community members throughout these years. Learning together is truly a gift that makes our community stronger. Our endeavor that we all feel honored to be a part of is our district's MTSS approach to tiered instruction. Through our district's MTSS model and approach to supporting students, we firmly believe that all students are capable of achievement. MTSS is a framework designed to meet the needs of all students by ensuring that schools optimize data-driven decision-making, progress monitoring, and evidence-based supports and strategies with increasing intensity to sustain student growth. MTSS is not just about tiered interventions, but rather how all the systems in a school or a district fit together to ensure a high-quality education for all students. Through this dynamic structure in our 6 elementary schools, we have been able to have data-based instructional meetings where various stakeholders, classroom teachers, special educators, multilingual teachers, administration, guidance counselors, literacy and STEAM coaches, reading and math specialists, reading assistants, and classroom assistants have opportunities to support tiered groupings for students based on academic and social emotional needs. Our district's core value of equity truly rings true to our education profession every day. We firmly believe that all students are capable of success. However, this takes a village, and it is not just one educator's job. Students are at the heart of what we do and carry out each day. The proposed recommendations will greatly impact our ability to truly use the MTSS model for our students. Cutting these positions that provide direct support to our Tier 2 and Tier 3 students will mean that significantly fewer students will receive this targeted support that we can provide. We are stretched now, and I don't know how we're going to do what we've been doing with fewer people. When services and support are taken away from our students, reaching high learning expectations isn't as attainable. We need you, as our valued school committee members, to listen and advocate for all of us, just as we do for our students. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Thomas Sandock, 190 Middle Road, Boxborough. Just adding that because you all assume Acton is. I'm a social studies teacher at the high school, and I'm here to talk about my experience and the challenges that many of us teachers here will face with these proposed budget cuts. In the past 10 years at AB, we've seen challenges, the tragedy of teen suicide, high rates of student anxiety, COVID lockdown, isolation, and accelerated negative student behaviors. For the past 4 consecutive years, we've seen annual budget cuts to faculty and staff positions. This year is no exception, as 2 full-time positions, colleagues of mine in the social studies department, are planned to be cut. Despite this, U.S. educators still achieve high standards of student academic achievement by doing more with less. This year, we are again being asked to do more, to redesign entire courses on the fly in a challenging leveling process that requires extensive scaffolding to high numbers of ML, IEP, and 504 students. The unleveled US 2 history course I teach has shared class sections with 5 other teachers. Finding common planning time is not possible with the current rotating drop 1 high school class schedule. Next year, with these cuts, we'll have even less faculty and larger class sizes. In addition, we've been told that next year we will lose one of our 2 preparation periods in order to take on supervisory/security duties during the school day. Our campus security staff has been reduced, and teachers are expected to make up the difference by managing student behavior in commons, overseeing a tidy lunchroom, monitoring school entrances and exits, and supervising certain closed hallway passages during lunch periods. This loss of time will make our teachers' jobs even more difficult, near impossible. Planning periods are critical for one-on-one student meetings, counselor and mandated IEP update meetings, teacher planning, curriculum alignment, grading analysis, department head meetings for individual student concerns. None of these critical meeting times are feasible from a hallway supervision or lunchroom oversight location. We ask the school committee to please re-examine these budget cuts, and out of concern over the negative impacts it will have on teachers, students, and the entire community. I grew up in this community. I grew up in Acton. We ask you to investigate alternative areas of savings and reprioritize, including material and outside consulting costs and out-of-district costs. We're thankful for the town for last year's override, but for the 4th straight year, AB still remains in budget deficit. The added pressure and stress of what's going to happen next year is real. and is harming educator morale, employee retention, and well-being on a daily basis. We pride ourselves at AB educators and appreciate giving back to the community, but we feel the district should take something off our plates as more and more is added.
Thank you.
We can only bend so far and for so long before we break. We hope you reconsider the budget shortfall priorities and look for ways to make our jobs more reasonable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Leah Lally, kindergarten and first grade teacher at Miriam. After several years of cuts in our school system, children today are having a different experience than those who came before them, even a few years ago. Already, there are kindergarten ML students who aren't receiving ML support because we don't have enough staffing. We currently don't have enough staffing to roll out MTSS the way in which it is intended. We currently have more kids in crisis than in the past, but less resources to support them. Right now, in crisis intervention teams or student support teams are called, some special education students aren't receiving their services. I understand there may not be an appetite for another override, but without one, or without a change in how our schools are funded, it's just going to get worse. This means that unfortunately, our students, your children, are going to be getting less, and there's not much of an appetite for that either. They deserve better, and I hope we can move forward in a way that they get what they deserve. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Amy Maciel. I'm a fourth grade teacher at Douglas, a fourth grade parent, and the vice president of the ABEI. The work of educators has become nearly impossible in recent years, and it's critical that the school committee takes this reality seriously. Every year, new programs and initiatives are added to our plates without additional support or resources or staffing. This year alone, we've seen increased expectations for individualized instruction, SEL, mandated assessments, MTSS, family outreach, all while managing larger class sizes and more complex student needs. These aren't small tasks, and they can't simply be absorbed into an already overflowing workload. To make matters worse, next year marks the 4th consecutive year, as Peter mentioned, of budget cuts in our district. Each cut's chipped away at what educators can reasonably accomplish, leaving us with fewer resources, less support, and mounting stress. It's not just teachers who are impacted, students feel it too. Fewer staff members means less opportunities and reduced access to critical services like counseling and special ed support. What's especially frustrating is the disconnect between what's asked of educators and the resources provided to achieve those demands. With new curriculum rollouts, behavior management programs, tech initiatives often coming with limited professional development, often led by the educators themselves, with no extra time in the schedule to implement them effectively. We're told to make it work, but the truth is it isn't working. The system's being held together by the sheer willpower of exhausted educators, and it isn't sustainable. The district can't raise additional revenue to even maintain staffing and resources, and it's time for an honest conversation with the community because the public needs to understand that the expectation for educators far exceed what's possible under these conditions. And simply thanking teachers for their hard work or acknowledging their dedication isn't enough. What educators need is action, real, tangible steps to make their jobs more feasible. And I need you to understand that educators are completely exhausted and overwhelmed. The district finds a way to provide the necessary funding and support, or it must adjust expectations to reflect the reality of what we can achieve with limited resources, and anything less is a disservice to the teachers, the students, and the community as a whole. And I'm going to add this in really fast, I just wrote it. But regardless of the Massachusetts Constitution or the current curriculum frameworks, when so-called leaders make hateful, disgusting statements or executive orders aimed at undermining, erasing, or further marginalizing our children, it's our duty to speak against it and rally behind them, and our silence at this time is demoralizing and deafening and unforgivable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay Toscas. I'm the STEAM coach at the Boardwalk Schools, Gates, and Douglas. Our Our dedicated educators are already stretched to their absolute limits. Each day they manage the academic and social emotional needs of students and increased workload demands, all while providing the high-quality education of our community, the high-quality education our community expects and our students deserve. We know you understand that asking us to accomplish more with fewer resources simply isn't sustainable. To make this message tangible, we've hand-stitched our reality onto fabric. Each tiny banner representing the voices of educators who can no longer stretch themselves thinner. We hope that these handcrafted pieces, thoughtfully created for each of you, serve as physical reminders that, like a fraying fabric that cannot be endlessly patched, our schools need proper resources to remain whole. So with that being said, we need you to hear us when we say we cannot do more with less.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak about the budget? All righty. Then public participation period is ending, and we're going to move into the school committee discussion. I'm going to work around the table, starting with Tori and going this way, and then I'll end with myself. So, Tori, first thoughts and comments.
I'm ready to cut straight to what Peter was asking for. Are we good with starting there?
Is there a consensus on moving right to what Peter had asked us to decide on? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean,
Yes,
Before
Ben.
we get there, I have a quick question for Peter.
Sure.
And I just want to make sure that I'm understanding this correctly. You had indicated that the proposed minimum school aid per pupil is going to be $75 per student in the upcoming budget. Is that correct?
So the governor proposed, the
yeah.
governor's budget proposed $75 per student minimum aid.
Now, in a previous meeting, you also had indicated that back in 2001, the per pupil aid was $175. Is that correct?
Yeah, so per pupil aid has fluctuated over time, everywhere between 0 at the lowest and maximum of 175. It's been 30 for a good stretch of years, and then the legislature increased it up to about 104 this past year over the governor's budget. And then, the governor's proposing 75. We're hoping that that increases.
So what would an increase in the assessment to $175 per pupil do to our budget if it went up that high?
So $30 a student, which is typically what I think of, and we have about 5,000 students, so every $30 is about 150,000 additional, so yeah, $500,000 or so, yeah. I mean, it's a significant amount of money. So there's a good opportunity here because Dan Sena's office had reached out to me and asked for some language around legislation. So we actually suggested they connect with Senator Lewis's office, who has filed legislation, and I believe Dan also filed on the House side to increase minimum aid to $150 a student I'm actually suggesting that they try and do the next 3 years so that we know about it early enough in the budget process to be able to use it, and then work on a real revision of the Chapter 70 formula.
Great, thank you.
And just to add to that, Peter, the reason that you're thinking of wanting to be able to look forward is because typically whatever we get, we can only use in the following year, right? There's a delay.
Yeah, we vote our budget in March. And then when the legislature finally passes its budget in July, it's helpful to rebuilding some of our reserves, but it's not helpful for the budgeting for the following year. I don't see their timeline changing. That's kind of an immovable object. But I do think if they can tell us, multiple years out what the spending could look like, that would be helpful.
All right, Yanshin?
I have two questions. Number one is that, do we have to make a motion to move and then discuss it, or?
No, this is just a first read.
Okay.
So we have budget Saturday, and then we'll have a formal vote. Peter just needs sort of a consensus around whether or not we're going to go with recommendation A or B. And if you could pull that up, Peter, just so we could see it, I think that would be helpful.
Right, I just want to make sure that I understand it correctly. So if we go with the recommended option, we will have the operating budget, but if we, for some miraculous reason, was able to add on to the revenue, we can add back the positions, is that correct? That's correct. Thank you.
Liz?
Just, I was going to clarify the same thing, but to, further clarify for that. So what we're sort of like voting for, what's being recommended is like, these are the assessments to the town. And then if we wind up getting extra money, amazing, maybe we can keep some of the very limited resources that we don't want to lose.
Right. I take the second option, the not recommended one, to be making unnecessary reductions when we could hopefully get something to retain these. So I think we probably all agree with what Peter has recommended for number one. Am I right? Okay. Okay, so Peter has what he needs. I did have some thoughts about the budget. I chair the budget subcommittee, so part of this is to just sort of facilitate a discussion with the public, but also for all of you. Peter, could you sort of talk a little bit about why this budget is targeting who it's targeting in terms of reductions? Some people have said, why can't you just cut from the administration or the central office?
Yeah, I mean, I hope that we don't target anyone, right? But I understand the use of that. I think we're trying to, every budget that we've proposed has made some reductions kind of district-wide in terms of administrative staff. We have left school staff in place to the greatest degree possible. I think, and we actually are going to talk to this on Budget Saturday, but we've seen a real increase in like student behaviors over time. And I don't mean conduct-related behaviors. I mean like, large behaviors that can be really disruptive in a classroom and in a school. And we heard from some of the educators about crisis teams having to be called and the number of crisis calls. Those are daily occurrences, and they're not just daily occurrences for one student at a time. Oftentimes we have 2 and 3 students who might be in some form of a crisis and require the assistance of a crisis team at a time. Our real worry is, when we build a crisis team, that includes a principal, assistant principal, counselor, psychologist, behaviorist, plus sometimes other staff within the school. But if we start to reduce the administrative support in schools, I'm really worried about the inadvertent impact on the other staff who will remain of trying to answer all those crises without administrative support, quite honestly. I think that would be really challenging. That has been ultimately the rationale. I think principals can talk to that a little bit more on Budget Saturday if you want to ask that question again. I'm sure they'd be able to articulate it, more eloquently than I can.
Absolutely. Lakshmi.
Peter, do you have numbers on those, the crises that you face and how the trending especially?
I think there's a slide for Budget Saturday.
I think, last year when we were going for the override, there was a lot of discussion about how education is different today. And obviously on Budget Saturday, we're going to go more in depth on different demographics and different needs and how sort of the idea of education has changed a little bit in the last few decades. A lot of people have sort of asked, why can't you just increase the class sizes more and then keep some of the assistant positions? And I think that you touched on a little bit about school restructuring versus the idea of closing a school. Could you add a little bit more to sort of how we would go about that discussion and the timeline for how that would take place over the next couple of years?
I mean, first I would say I would not under any circumstances recommend that take place for FY26. This is a much larger community discussion that needs to take place. I think when I heard the discussion last year, the only thing we heard about was maybe close a school. And it became really divisive very, very quickly. But also, quite honestly, as I stepped back from that dialogue, it actually became unproductive because we were discounting multiple options before we had actually put everything on the table. And so I think if we're going to do anything, I think it needs to start with a visioning process for what we want out of our schools over the next, couple of decades, because you don't change school configurations every 2 years. But really do a visioning process over what we want out of schools, get the community input around something like that. I think that, having to bring the stakeholders in, have multiple engagement opportunities. I think one of the things that I've talked with, Adam about, when I have met with him, is one of the last large-scale visioning processes we had was when we were thinking of the Boardwalk campus. And it really brought together, hundreds of people in the community into that process. I think we need something similar with a lot of different touch points, but then do the research on what are all the different school configurations and grade configurations that are out there in the world. What are the priorities that we've said we have, and then think about what meets those priorities, and do the priorities also align with the resources of the communities that we think we have. And I think there just needs to be some soul searching if we're going to go down that road of what are our priorities, what are our resources, and now what are the models that are out there that might best fit those. So, even different schools in different areas right around us all think differently about how they configure students. There's no one way that's correct. I will say everything I can think of has trade-offs, right? What we do has some trade-offs. And what we're seeing is the trade-off we're making is we're getting thinner and thinner and thinner within the institutions, and as enrollment has declined, particularly at elementary schools, we don't have 21 sections in every elementary school, and so every year educators are having to bounce back and forth between different grade levels, and as we add new curricula and increase the requirements for teachers to learn new curricula and do it. It's one thing to learn an entirely new third grade curriculum. It's something else when the second year that you actually should now be getting better at the third grade curriculum, you're actually now in fifth grade. And you're starting over again and doing it again. And then 2 years later, now you're in third grade or second grade. That has a real impact on how people are able to do their job and do it effectively. I've heard that from teachers. And so, I think we need to think about, there are strengths to what we do, certainly. We are one of the top school districts in the state year in, year out. There's no doubt about that everyone does their job exceptionally well. But I think we have to think about, do we have the resources to try and sustain the system that we have? Or is there another way of organizing our resources that might be more effective in some of the priorities we've now seen? We have a different student population than we had 30 years ago. We're trying to meet the needs of those students with some old systems. And I just think there's, if we don't get more revenue, we're going to just get increasingly more frustrated. And I can see the cultural impact that's having across the district. And at some point, it's like we have to say uncle because we can't continue to fund it and be as effective as we were. So that's a long-winded way of answering that question, because I don't take it lightly, the idea of doing a major reorganization. But I don't think that we're having enough resources to do it the way we're doing it effectively.
And I think that the important element of that is sort of a fairness part. If, last year people were calling for closing Conan and then dispersing the students, then we're sort of taking away their choice. So if we're talking about a more collaborative approach where we really look at the whole set of elementary schools and figure out exactly how best to restructure that, I think that, there's definitely a lot to be said for, that could be a good path to go down next year or the year after. Is there any other comment or question from the committee? Yenshin.
I have a comment. I know I probably cannot play the newbie card any longer. This is a year and a half in. I think what I'm seeing is that I'm having, the perception is that the system is bankrupting public education. And we hear from the teachers, most of us here have students still in the system or just had kids graduating. So we've seen the strain it has put on the kids from COVID to 4 years straight of cuts. And yet, every year, I think when, Christmas or the end of year come around, there are a lot of, let's thank the teachers, let's get them gift cards. I think my comment here is actually a plea to the public that we received a flood of emails and messages about the school calendar. I'm asking everybody to write to our representatives, legislators. We need to ask the government, help us out, don't bankrupt us. That's it.
Yeah, I appreciate that point. This is largely a state funding issue. And just to remind everybody and level set, the foundation budget formula was set in the early 1990s and was recognized at least 10 years ago that it was no longer working, and the state convened a foundation budget review committee, which spent a couple years reviewing it, then came out with a bunch of recommendations to increase funding levels significantly, and the legislature did nothing with that for several years. So, I can't stress enough how important it is to contact your state reps and your state senator, and that goes across the board. Nobody sitting here thinks that our teachers aren't working hard enough. Nobody sitting here wants to cut one more single thing. Nobody sitting here doesn't understand how much stress and pressure you guys are under and how hard you are working, to do your jobs in really impossible circumstances that are getting more and more impossible. So, it's just very, very difficult given where we are and the lack of flexibility that we have. So I would just ask Peter, and I'm not an educator, and I know that many of your duties are driven by state law and regulations, and also just your desire to do the best that you can. But if there are things that can be taken off, I think it is not fair to roll out new programs and roll out new initiatives. I'm sure that the leveling initiative is just very, very difficult to manage in the day-to-day. So I don't know, if it's possible to find things that can be taken off the plates of educators, maybe even small things, or, other ways to ease their burden, because unless and until more money becomes available to us, it really is not, everybody saw this. We pay people. That's what our budget is. And we can't, cut out some of the paper we buy or other things that is going to make a significant enough difference to be able to maintain staffing everywhere. Nobody doesn't appreciate all the work of classroom assistants or see how necessary they are and how much they assist the teachers and the kids. So, we know you can't do more with less, and we wish we had more. So please, focus your efforts in that regard on the State House, and, we will do the best we can by you.
And I think to add to that also, it's going to take every community standing up and saying this needs to change for the state legislature to act. So your friends, your neighbors, your colleagues, whoever in other towns, also tell them what's going on. This goes for everybody here and everybody listening at home. We all have to mobilize and we all have to push in order to get this. Vikram?
Yeah, it really seems we're in between a rock and a hard place. We're legally obligated to provide a balanced budget. The towns only want to provide so much. They're not willing to open up their coffers more. And so we're in this sort of downward spiral because money's not coming in. So it's either the state or from the towns, and we're really not getting anything from either of those, and we have to balance the budget. We don't have a choice. Nobody wants to cut teachers. I certainly don't. I come from a long line of teachers. That's the last thing I want to do. I have 2 kids in the district. I don't want to do that. Nobody here wants to do that. But we're like stuck in this really awful and horrific situation. We had to deal with it last year, we're doing it this year, then the next year, it seems like there's really no end in sight, and it's just maddening, infuriating. And you see billions of dollars given to the MBTA. I love the MBTA, I used to work for the MBTA as well, but I mean, it seems like $2 million is just like a rounding error somewhere for the state, you know? And then there's like every school district is suffering. I mean, really, it's gonna have to grassroots organization across school districts to go and just, all of us have to storm the State House and demand they give us more money, because what else are we gonna do? Or else, you know, basically put it out to the towns. But I mean, you know, we barely passed this thing last year. I don't know. I mean, it's going to have to be grassroots mobilization to get more money coming in, because that's really the only thing, and that's going to have to come from everybody, you know, pulling to get there. And we're stuck here, and we don't like it. I don't want to do any of this. I don't, you know. But
all right. Is there any comment from anybody else on the committee? Andrew, I see you looking like you want to comment.
Always, but it's all going to be the same thing. We're dealing with, excuse me, 2 kinds of inflation. Prices are rising, needs are growing, and it feels like a checkmate. Peter, your team's done an amazing job of finding every angle. The operations here are incredibly efficient, but dozens of districts are finding themselves in our position. We're at a point where the extra has been cut from everything, and where you feel the stress in all of this. The real danger is what happens to our students. Remember, Curie used to use the quote all the time that a budget's a moral document, and the more we cut, the more we look for cuts, the less moral this all feels. I aligned with the recommended, but I'm just frustrated by the whole thing. It'd be nice if there was a way of being able to get more revenue in. So first thing I learned as a school committee person when said there's a revenue problem in town. I don't know how to get around it.
Yeah, it's difficult when you're tasked with balancing a budget that is the result of decades, you know, of different choices that led us all here, you know, both at the macro level to the micro level. I want all educators to know that you're valued. We respect you. This is not at all what any of us want to do, and workers everywhere should be guaranteed good, safe, healthy working environments, and should be able to expect a raise every year, and shouldn't have that get cut in half or even more by inflation. If we could, we would raise everybody's salaries and throw money at this district, and I hope someday that actually is a choice that we are able to make. Are we finished with the discussion, the preliminary budget discussion for tonight? Okay. So we're going to revisit this on Budget Saturday, which is February 8th. It's going to start at 8:30 in the morning. It'll be here in the admin building in this room, right? I hope everybody who can comes, or at least, you know, watches the ActonTV link. I think last year it was a really fruitful discussion to have everybody in the room and able to speak their piece and collaborate. Nobody wants to spend a Saturday doing that, but it is really important, and it ends up being a really good community building exercise, whether, you know, we want to talk budget or not. All right, so I think we're going to do the subcommittee member reports first. I don't have anything on my end to report. Is there something for policy?
Yeah.
Have a good night, everybody.
The policy subcommittee met via Zoom Friday the 24th at 7:30 a.m. We did a second run of the discrimination policy and accepted some of the proposed wording changes by principals in the district. Be on the lookout for a second read to come to the school committee at a near future business meeting. We then had the first read of the competency determination policy. This is a little more time sensitive, since we need to have our district graduation requirements now that the MCAS is no longer a requirement from the state. We'll be bringing that to a committee soon for a read, since we need to get that in place. Finally, we began a discussion on the request from a community member to vote a resolution for the advocacy of students, and while it would make us all feel better to make a strong statement, we don't think it's in the best interest of our students and families to call attention to our district.
Thank you. Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah, so, I heard, one of the comments publicly, and I absolutely wholeheartedly agree with that. I think, we're entering a period of time where our news cycle is very rapid right now, and I don't want to make this a political statement, but there are locus of control to all of this. There's been a lot around, things being done in the federal government that are education related and are deeply impacting our teachers, our kids, and community members. Immigration has been one topic. Rights of students, LGBTQ+ students has been another topic. We're seeing kind of a flood of executive orders right now. I think, kind of dating back a number of years, that news cycle is fast. And I think we're going to expect that out of the federal government at this point. Most of what comes out isn't worthy of a lot of time being spent on it, quite honestly. We have really strong core values as a district around what we believe in for our kids. Our community has really strong values about what the community believes in for its students. We have a state that has enshrined a lot of the protections that we're most worried about for these kids in the Constitution, and our Supreme Judicial Court has actually upheld those through numerous decisions. My greatest fear is we're going to spend more time worrying about things that won't likely impact us in the end than gives us a focus on the kids who are in front of us. And so I want to be really tempered in the amount of time we're taking responding to some of this stuff, and at the same time recognize there are people in our community very worried about that. We are absolutely here to support our students. That is our focus, and we're going to do the right thing for all of our kids. And we're not going to get into a cycle of trying to respond to things that happen in the federal government every 24 to 48 hours, because that is not a good model for collective mental health of a school community. And so, I'll say that once, but you won't hear me saying that again. I just want to make sure we understand what our focus is, and the focus is on the kids in front of us. There's a lot of noise and a lot of distraction that can happen outside of that, and let's leave it at that. It's noise and distraction, but we're here to serve the kids that we have in front of us.
Thank you. Is there a Acton Select Board update?
I missed it for this week.
Okay. I also do not have a FinCom update, so don't feel bad. Boxborough Select Board would have been Adam. Would Liz like to take that on?
I'm also prepared to talk about the Boxborough Finance Committee. They met on Tuesday, January 28th at 7 p.m. They discussed the increase of Maya insurance, which is about 14% higher than anticipated, which I suspected that we would also see something similar to that. The committee did note that with the new housing going in for Acton, it might significantly impact the district's enrollment numbers, and we're surprised, and they just want to sort of like let us know that that might be something we should anticipate in our budgeting plans.
Thank you. Was there an ALG meeting between? Okay. So none of that. No HIT update. All right. So I think there aren't any more updates as far as all of those liaison positions go. For the school committee calendar, or the school calendar for next year, 2025 to 2026, this is our second read. So is there any other discussion about the school calendar before we move for a vote? Ben.
I'll try to keep my comments brief. Over the last several days, we've received numerous emails regarding our school calendar. The overwhelming message has been clear. Our community cares deeply about ensuring the calendar reflects the rich diversity of those who call Acton-Boxborough home. Many of you shared thoughtful perspectives on how an inclusive calendar sends a powerful message of respect and belonging to every student and family. The feedback underscores the values that define our district values of inclusivity, representation, and respect for all. Your voice matters. They guide us as we continue to strive to create a learning environment where every member of our community feels seen, valued, and celebrated. Your engagement helps us build a stronger and more inclusive school community, and I will be voting in affirmative for this calendar. Thank you.
Thank you. Yanchin?
I have a comment. I think we're going to vote on the calendar. I don't have any objections to it. I think I just want to give some background about certain groups, how we celebrate certain holidays. Like Lunar New Year in Asia is a 15-day celebration. Nobody will be going to work. They'll probably be stuck in traffic. It's kind of like Thanksgiving in America. I appreciate that we have all these holidays on the calendar, but I also want to just share that for people who are living in America, and if they have to make a trip out to another continent, it usually, at the moment, is about 24 to 48 hours travel. So I absolutely understand what you're saying. I also read all the notes from 2016, which is almost 10 years ago, right? When the school committee actually had a subcommittee to study the calendar and had a discussion. And I remember one of the comments from a rabbi then was that we put in the calendar holiday, we give the holidays off based on the way people observe it, not just like unilaterally everybody gets a day off. So I thought it was that comment stuck with me after reading, 20 pages. I think it's possible that we're just hitting the 2 years this is 2016, like 8 years ago? Maybe every 8 to 10 years, we would have an academic year that is really heavily impacted by all the holidays off. So if we get through those 2 years, we don't have to worry about it.
That's thinking optimistically. Vikram?
I just want to say, I grew up here in the Boston area, and I remember going to Howard Johnson's. I couldn't find any keychain with Vikram on it, nothing at all, So to have these holidays celebrated, I should also say in India, we also have a similar festival, Navratri, and there are a number of them, right, where the entire city, like the entire country essentially shuts down for 9 days. There's festivities and dancing in the streets. The United States, I think one other country that works as hard as we do. And really, we get so little for it. So it seems like, we should have fewer vacation days. I mean, who would argue to that effect? It's, I know there's childcare and this and that, but I mean, and also there's the equity part, right? I mean, this is nice. This is essentially now finding a keychain in my name. So like Ben, I'm also going to be voting in the affirmative.
Lakshmi?
I think a few sessions ago, I think Peter presented about cultural sensitivity. And what he talked about at that point, I think that made a very good impression was, we don't talk about cultural islands. We treat each of the students as culturally special, and their needs are special, rather than just treating 5 or 6 groups as special, okay? So I think kind of keeping to that, and looking at the graphs that he just showed few minutes ago, where we have the rising population of low income and non-English speaking, or not the primary language. Looking at that, what it says is there are a lot of struggling families here. What would be culturally more insensitive than saying that you have to find childcare, or you have to kind of leave your child uncared for when you have to work 2-3 jobs?
I think that's sort of the ongoing tension is, working families who rely on schools to have their kids, in a safe learning environment while they go to work. On the other hand, school hours have never been conducive to both parents working full-time. It's always a struggle. You need before care, after care, holiday care. I think the issue is larger than the calendar, and I think in a lot of ways, this is sort of one of those times where we end up fighting amongst ourselves and sort of, instead of sort of seeing the larger issue, which I think is childcare, which I'll go back to last time I had mentioned. Maybe we need to figure out a way to expand the program to cover some of those days. Obviously, that's a staffing issue and an ongoing funding issue and a space issue. But I do think that's the answer. I felt very moved by a lot of the emails we received and people that came to speak. I think it's very important to not just recognize Christian holidays, which is exactly what it would be. That's just the way that our government has structured things. And it's just not fair, and it's also just not a reflection of our student population. And as things change, I think that it's a beautiful thing to be able to bring in and celebrate all the different cultures. I think it's fabulous when my kids have the day off and they know why, and they bring home materials that they received at school and art projects they've done, and they're very excited to teach me all about it. And I think having the day off actually helps make that a bigger impact for them. To take, seriously. Is there any other discussion on the calendar? Tori?
So it was interesting looking at some of the feedback we got, because I think we saw a number from a number of different perspectives, and I think there's some that we haven't mentioned tonight. One that struck me was discussion about continuity of learning from our teachers and concerns about what the years when all of this hits during a school day, plus having Juneteenth right at the end, right when we're thinking about what happens with snow days and how does that work. Like, that's a federal holiday. We don't have a choice on that, which is awesome. And I guess one of my wonderings is, if we do take this on as something that we want to look at more deeply, I wonder if there's a way we could be deliberate, one, in supporting our teachers when we know this is coming. Like, we went through this last year. It wasn't fun. We know it's coming. Are there things we can do to help? We've just heard that our teachers have a lot going on. This is going to be our calendar year. And then also go back and look and say, did we make any changes to how we approach this that were helpful? So that's one of my curiosities. I also found it really interesting because, of course, I went out and looked for some data. I found it really interesting to look at Middlesex County as kind of compared to the rest of the nation. So there is actually a survey out there that does basically a religious census, because you can't get that out of our US Census data. Pretty cool to see that we are one of the very much more diverse counties in the entire nation. It doesn't get more granular than that, so I can't tell you about Acton or about Boxborough. I think we had the highest concentration of Hindu people here in the nation, in counties over 10,000 people. Pretty cool. Very significant practicing Christian population with more Catholic people than we have in some other areas of the US. Our Jewish population is significant. I think we know that. They have made their voices known. But among the very highest concentrations in the US, we have a lot of people who care very deeply about a lot of culturally very important things. And yet we also know we're becoming economically more diverse. And so one of my wonderings is, how do we find out whether what we're doing to celebrate our cultural diversity is having a negative impact? We haven't heard from anybody who says they're having economic struggles, but if I had to guess, the people who probably have the least time to be able to follow this conversation are probably precisely those people. So how do we reach out and find out if this is actually a thing that we should be doing something about? And then the other thing that just struck me was what Yenshin brought up. I hadn't really thought about observing Lunar New Year, but yet knowing that, if you were with your extended family, you would be traveling for, what did you say it was, the highest migration of people in one single day in the entire world is the travel home for Lunar New Year. And realizing that, okay, so we added 4 additional days off, plus this all happened at the same time that Juneteenth came into being. So we added an entire week, right? And so I guess I'm just wondering if maybe we should ask our families with what their experiences are, based on their cultural background, because for some people it is very important to have that day off. We've heard that. And for other people, maybe the way we're observing this isn't the best thing for them. And I just don't think we know that. And without asking, we're not going to be able to figure it out. So I am absolutely in favor of voting this tonight. I'm good with moving forward, but if we choose to go back and look at it, it's complicated, and I think we should do so mindfully.
Okay.
So I keep hearing the statement thrown around. Somehow giving a holiday to a cultural group makes other people being very sensitive to their other people's cultural needs. Is there any kind of research to back that up? I don't think I've really heard, or in my life experience, anybody developing more sensitivity. It just seems a very kind of token gesture.
Andrew?
I don't think it's about, I'm giving you this. I think it's more about, as a community, we recognize we're not just one thing. And it might not be that you are, as someone who observes a holiday, made to feel any more special because you're given a day off. But the visibility, as Vikram mentioned, of finding his name tag at the Howard Johnson's on a keychain. It's about being a part of the larger culture. I don't think you can look at the district observing the cultural holidays of the population as a concept, as anything but positive for the whole community. We can talk about the hardship that comes with having to manage things, but again, this is for a year from now. I know that in my house, we have the calendar up on the wall, and we know when these days are coming, so we have a way of planning for it weeks, months, now, a year ahead of time. The respect provided by the community to the individual groups, I think, is a positive thing. I'd love to see how we could integrate the reason for these observances into the school year in some way, to be able to bring that as part of it. I know that a couple years ago at Douglas, one of the ML teachers for Lunar New Year gave out coins on strings as a way of being able to, and the kids loved learning about this. But this isn't like a zero-sum game. Getting a holiday doesn't take away from somebody who doesn't observe it. It just recognizes that we're more than our own family, and I think that's important.
I want to address sort of what Lakshmi said, that I think, you know, it would be interesting to find out if people do feel that way. And I think what Tori is sort of getting at is if we do revisit this next year, I think it's important to ask everybody, does this help you feel seen? Is there a different way that you would prefer to have that visibility amplified? I do think we got a lot of emails that said, I, as a member of this community, do feel represented by having this holiday off. You know, I do appreciate having this time. And it was several different groups that I think holidays are on the table here for, like Lunar New Year and Diwali and, you know, certainly all the Jewish holidays. I do feel a little bit like, I don't know if we can always quantify. I don't know if you can quantify everything in life, though. And I think that part of community building and part of experiencing each other's cultures, maybe it isn't the answer to end racism, but I don't see how it doesn't help, you know? And I don't know if that's quantifiable. I hope maybe we could.
Sitting on the other side where I am one of those in those groups, I can tell you from my experience it doesn't reflect it. So what I'm asking is, let's keep the focus of the school committee as to help the students and be practical. What I'm trying to get to is, let's come up with the numbers on what makes sense rather than getting carried away by this being culturally sensitive with the goal of something that is never proven. That makes us feel good. That's what I'm trying to say.
I think I would say in response to that, that if we were getting carried away, to use your language, I think then we'd have every holiday on the calendar, which we certainly don't do. Vikram, I know you've been waiting to speak.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, well, two things. One, as a minority, hanging out with a lot of other minority families and the families of my friends, everybody is indeed very pleased that these holidays are out there. So there is great, acknowledgement, and a lot of people do appreciate having these on the calendar. I also want to say that the only person who mentioned Muslims was, in fact, the rabbi who spoke, and one of the holidays mentioned is Eid, and I know our Muslim brothers and sisters also appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you
I'm
for adding.
myself am agnostic, I want to say. My family actually history is Jain, which is sort of cross between Hindu and Buddhism. That's another story.
Thank you for reminding us about our Muslim community members as well. Yangshin?
I don't know if we can quantify that. I know, Lashmi, you want to, but as a person, I have two multiracial boys. You guys all know that. I actually start seeing the change in them as how because they've been in district for a long time, from when we start beginning to give the days off to now. Before it was like, can you do something special because it's Lunar New Year or it's Diwali? But now, this year, as they realize who they are, they started to see the students who they can identify or share something with. Like, oh, it's Lunar New Year, and in my class, I'm not the only one. And I see other students who share my ancestry, identity, our traditions, and they have things to talk about. It's something that I feel like it's nice for children to have in a school environment, to be able to build relationships with others. And the second thing is that I think everybody who is seeing, if you go to a conservatory, if you, go play soccer or basketball, I think there's always a line at the very bottom. Don't let finances become the roadblock from you participating in this activity. So I do hear you. We have a lot of families who are low income, who have to hold on to jobs, multiple jobs. They're not at the table to advocate for their kids. They probably don't even have the opportunity to celebrate it with them. Maybe, which is kind of dire to say that in this environment where we're cutting like crazy, but it should be our goal to provide opportunities for students to help those families, not to say, okay, you can't do it, let's just take it away.
We could talk about this for literally hours, and I know that because I've been on the school committee for many years. I would like to move the question. I think that we have all arrived at our own conclusions about this year's calendar, and we're ready to vote it. And I think that all of this discussion is wonderful, but more properly belongs in next year's discussion about how we're going to deal with this. So I would like to vote.
So I hear that Ginny has made a motion to accept the 2025 to 2026 academic calendar as proposed.
Seconded.
And Vikram has seconded. All right, so I guess we can just do all together. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? One, and that's Lakshmi. Any abstentions? All right, so the calendar has been approved for next year with all of the holidays maintained. We might revisit this next year, we'll see. But for the 2025 to 2026 calendar, we have all of those holidays still on there. Oh yeah, I can't turn this off because I have to keep talking. I don't have a school committee goal update because I'm not Adam. So we can move to the consent agenda. Items on the consent agenda do not usually require discussion and are approved with one vote unless any member would like to hold an item for discussion and a separate vote. I will read each item, and if a member would like it held, please say hold. Members do not have to have attended a meeting to vote on the minutes. So we just have the approval of ABRSC meeting minutes of 1/16/25 and approval of warrants as presented in the packet 1/30/25. Recommendation to approve items on the consent agenda. Anyone?
So moved.
All right. So I'm going to give it to Tori as the person who moved, and Ben seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, so.
Move to adjourn.
That is approved. I hear that Liz moved to adjourn and Tori seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, then the meeting is over. Have a good night, everybody.